Okay, I'm going to start. I'm Nancy Phillips. I coordinate the Illinois Family Resource Center. I recognize so many names that I'm sure many of you know all about us and have heard the spiel, so I'm not going to go through all of it. I just share with you that we are a project that started to be 1 or 2 years old, and we're now heading toward our 11th year, which is exciting because that shows the real need for people to start talking about how do we support families and communities that are impacted by substance use disorder and co-occurring. We are funded by the Behavioral Health and Recovery Division of the Department of Human Services. Yes, I'm getting a gravelly voice now. And I have a webinar after this to present. Our house in Charleston, Illinois holds the contract. The Illinois Family Resource Center is a statewide program, so we provide services and resources and technical assistance and all the things that you can find out about on the website throughout the entire state. What I will say is welcome. This is going to be a great hour and a half for you folks. I guarantee it. I will ask you to stay in attendance because we're being very careful about making sure that when we offer the certificates for hours, that we honor true attendance at the webinars. The other thing I will say, there will be a Zoom webinar that'll pop up right after this. Would appreciate, it's just a really quick one if you'd fill that out, but we will also be sending out a Google survey that we are doing this year that asks a few more questions, and it's going to really help us look at what we need to be doing next year. What do we need to change? And what do you want in the many different roles that you have? Because it's not all the same, and we need to figure out how to come together rather than continue working in our silos. So anything that comes up, you can stick in chat. I will monitor that. And if you've got any questions, I'll see if I can't answer it. And if not, I will find the answers and get back to you after this. So I'm going to tell you that you're going to have a great time doing the strengthening the father-son relationship as SUDS prevention. Mark Sanders is delivering that. I don't even know if Mark remembers, but the first time I heard him do something on the importance of the male role in prevention was back in the 90s at a
Wow.
conference that we were doing. And I never forgot that because it made such an impact on me when we started thinking about some things we'd like for Mark to do for us. The father and son and male role came to my mind, and he says, "Yeah, I can do that," which I'm sure he's done many times. Mark's done training all over the world and definitely throughout the United States. And there aren't many people in this field in Illinois that don't know who Mark is, and very positively. Mark's done 5 books. He's had 2 stories published in the Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is kind of really impressive. He does lectures and has worked with the University of Chicago, Loyola University of Chicago, and Illinois State University Schools of Social Work. He's been honored with 4 Behavioral Health Lifetime Achievement Awards through NADAC Enlightenment Awards. Doesn't surprise me. I figured he'd have a whole page full. He also received, and I was here, he also received the Jessica Hayes Lifetime Award, which was granted by the Illinois Certification Board, and I was there when that happened, and that was great. So I want to have turn this over to him, but I just want to say that one of the things that I really respect about Mark is I have heard him be an advocate for the people in the field over and over again. And we need that because it hasn't always been an easy ride to earn an honor being in this field. It's carried some of the stigma in the early years that we are fighting at a whole different level. And so I'm just really glad to say that I've had that opportunity. So, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you, and anything else you want to share, you're welcome to it.
And thank you so much, Nancy, and good morning, everyone. About 6 years ago, I was flying in from Arizona to Chicago, where I live. And on the plane next to me was a man who had earned 6 Purple Hearts. And how do you earn a Purple Heart? I'm glad you asked. Bravery. He was a 95-year-old World War II veteran. In other words, for 3.5 hours on this flight, I'm sitting next to the bravest human being I ever met in my life. And at one point, he says, Mark, what do you do for a living? I says, I'm a social worker. I give speeches. I talk to counselors, therapists, case managers, recovery support specialists, clinical supervisors, people who help others for a living. And he told me to tell you, thank you for your service. Thank you so much for your service. Know that I know that the world cannot compensate you enough for the important work that you do. I read a book called Good to Great, and the author says you can tell what's most important to a society by its tallest buildings. You see, 100 years ago, the tallest buildings were churches. But today, the tallest buildings are Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 companies. But the author says that no society is great just because you have tall buildings and Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 companies. A society is great when you have great counselors and great probation officers and great social workers and great therapists, people like you who help others for a living. If you're sitting in a room near a mirror, if someone else is in that room with you, look at that person, look in that mirror, and repeat these words to yourself. This is your lucky day. You're looking at greatness. Take a moment, if you would, and just claim that. The fact that every day you wake up, someone's life condition can be improved. Thank you so much again for all that you do. I'm celebrating this year 43 years as a certified alcohol and drug abuse counselor. I've been doing this work for my entire adult life. And people often ask me, what's kept me going for 43 years? And the answer is, I collect recovery stories that inspire me. So I'll begin with two short stories and then we'll get into our content. A number of years ago, there was a woman whose addiction landed her in prison. And the first day she was incarcerated, the corrections officer handed her a roll of toilet paper. And the woman ran out of toilet paper by the second day and said to the officer, I ran out of toilet paper. And the officer said, this is not the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, this is prison. But I'm out of toilet paper. This is not the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, this is prison. A few years ago, I attended a conference in Washington, D.C., and that woman was the keynote speaker. And she shared a story of having been in recovery for a decade and regaining custody of her children and running two successful businesses. And that conference was held. It was held at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. I never get tired of a really good recovery story. And the second story is about actress Mary Tyler Moore. I imagine some of you are familiar with actress Mary Tyler Moore. For those of you who are not, in the 1970s, she starred in a sitcom called The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Her son later died by suicide. And so Mary Tyler Moore started drinking so heavy she developed alcoholism after her son died. She went to treatment. And the first day she showed up in treatment and sat in a group, the other clients were talking about God. And Mary Tyler Moore said, there is no God. She was angry because her son died. If you keep talking about God, I'm leaving this facility. And they continued to talk about God. Mary Tyler Moore stood up, left the group room, went in the nurse's station, picked up a phone, and called the airlines for a flight out of town. And the airline employee who took the call said, did you say your name is Mary Tyler Moore? Yes. Are you the actress Mary Tyler Moore? Yes. She said, I want to thank you so much. You might have saved my family. When my husband read that you went into drug treatment, my husband went into treatment. Thank you so much. You might have saved my family. And Mary Tyler Moore hung up the phone, went back in the group room and said, I think I just spoke to God. And she stayed in treatment, completed treatment, and spent the rest of her life helping people with their recovery. It's been these kind of stories that's kept me going for almost 4.5 decades. Welcome. Can you tell me um, really what you do? Are you a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker? What's your role? You can put that in chat. What do you do? Are you a part-time plumber on the weekend? Medical surgeon? Catherine inspires hope. Down with dope, up with hope, Catherine. A deflection operator. Guy does. Anyone else? What do you do? We got school social workers. These are the ones who get the summers off, Nancy. They get to replenish themselves, those school social workers. A husband, a father, and a police officer. Welcome, Adam. Thank you for your service. We have a family support specialist in Jessica. A recovery home manager. Thank you, George. We have Felix providing peer support. Felix is out there in the community in the cold weather. While the rest of us sit behind desks. People are dying out there. We want to join you out there, Felix. Keith is a messenger. Welcome, Keith. All right. So our topic today is strengthening the father-son relationship as substance use disorders prevention. I imagine you are familiar with Howard Stern. He does 4 hours of radio, and some people think that Howard Stern may be the best DJ in all of radio. Get it? 4 hours a day, no singing, no music, just Howard talking to his guests. He's never played a song. He's never sung a song, and yet he's inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So he was interviewed by David Letterman. David Letterman said to Howard Stern, I hear you have daddy issues. Howard Stern says, I have daddy issues. He said, tell me the story. And Howard said when he was a little boy, there was nothing he wanted more than to get his father's attention. And every day his father would come home from work at 5 o'clock and sit in his favorite chair. And Howard Stern would sit next to his dad trying to get his attention. He couldn't get his attention, but the father would sit in his chair and look at the radio, listen to the radio that was in front of him. So as a little boy, Howard said, if I could just get inside of that radio, I'd have my father's attention. And if I was really good when I was in the radio, I'd really have his attention. And he was really good on the radio. As I mentioned, inducted into the Hall of Fame. But he said, but the relationship that I didn't have with my father affected all other relationships. That's what we're going to talk about today. The importance of that relationship and how it affects other relationships, including one's relationship with drugs. So some of you are thinking, what about the father-daughter relationship? Even though we're focused on the father-son relationship, and you have a really good point. In fact, I bring your attention to a book. Would you jot down the name of this book? The book is entitled, Whatever Happened to Daddy's Little Girl? Whatever Happened to Daddy's Little Girl? And it tells a story of this, based in research of the impact of fatherlessness on daughters. A research-based book. It tells a story that when girls are deserted by their father, the first thing they go through when they're young is what's called the search. There's a knock on the door. Is that my father coming to visit me? There's a ring in the doorbell. She runs to the door. Is that my father? Right? She's walking to school as a little girl, looking in the cars driven by men, wondering, is that her father in one of those cars? Is he going to stop and drive me to school? Question. Daughters deserted by their father, at what age does the search end? Would you put your response in chat? When daughters are deserted by their fathers, when do they stop searching? What age? Taylor says never. Summer says never. Hey, Renault Tatum, never, never, never. Yet one can spend her whole life searching. Research says that daughters deserted by their fathers often go through a period of promiscuity. What the research says, it's not so much about sex, it's about magical thinking. Her belief is, if I sleep with all of these people, maybe my father will discover how desirable I am. He'll hear about me and he'll come and rescue me. Daughters deserted by their fathers, according to research, often date older partners. Why is that? Because sometimes she's looking to her father through an older partner. For some girls, dating much older partners It becomes her introduction to early sex, early drug activity, etc. Daughters deserted by their fathers, thus says the research, are 140 times more likely to have a baby as a teenager. Her mindset is my father left me, but I have a baby that will never leave me. Daughters deserted by their fathers, and this is important, is 6 times more likely to be sexually abused because predators know that he's not there as well. As a matter of fact, men who sex traffic girls often want to be called daddy. Sometimes he psychologically understands, right? That when the father is not there, when there's wounds there, she becomes more vulnerable. And of course, there's a relationship between the sexual abuse and substance use. And some of you are thinking, what about the mother-son relationship? No, you are onto a good point there. In fact, you all are therapists. Be my therapist for a moment. You see, I got everything I needed from my father. I'm the man who suffers from mother hunger. I'm the man who never got what he needed from his mother. Here's the equation. Me and my siblings didn't get enough mothering because our mother didn't get enough fathering. We didn't get enough mothering because our mother didn't get enough fathering. She was the favorite of his 14 children, but my grandfather was so intoxicated, so drunk, that he couldn't give our mother the love that she needed. So she became man crazy, where she put men in her life ahead of her children. That's an important relationship. So I don't want you to think I'm ignoring it. We can only focus on one today. We're focusing on the father-son. Then what about the mother-daughter relationship? It's an incredible story about this little girl who had polio. And doctor said to that little girl, you'll never walk again. And her mother said, not only will you walk, you'll run. And that little girl is Wilma Rudolph.
Hmm.
And she won the 100-yard dash in the 1960 Olympics. And she simply said, I believe my mother. When that relationship is solid, mothers give their daughters confidence. They become like rites of passage facilitators for their daughters. And when that relationship is in pain, there are daughters who suffer for the rest of their life. So all of these relationships are important. It's just in our time today, we focus on fathers and sons. And we begin with what involved and responsible fathers provide for their sons. Positive impact in utero. It turns out that when a woman is pregnant and the father of the yet to be born is supportive in a healthy manner, then that relationship, his availability, his presence, his involvement has positive impact in utero. The baby is more likely to be born at like 9 months as opposed to like premature and at a decreased risk of premature death. I don't know why, but the research says that sons are more likely to die in childbirth than our daughters. And when fathers are responsible and supportive, it can make all the difference in the world even before the baby is born. He provides nurturing, affirmations. It's an incredible story about this boy who played Park District football. He was a fifth string running back on the football team. What are the chances you're ever going to get in a football game as a fifth string running back? I'll answer my own question. If you're a fifth string running back on the football team, you would have an easier time finding a penny in Sahara Desert never getting in a football game. If you're a fifth string running back on the football team, you'd be more likely to be struck by lightning 5 times in the same day and live. Your whole job as a fifth string running back is to watch grass grow on the football field. You're not going to play. Anyway, the boy's father died, and they held a funeral on a Friday. And he walked in the locker room the following Saturday morning and said, Coach, I want to play the whole game. And the coach did what you would have done, let him play the whole game. His father died. The boy scored 5 touchdowns. The great Walter Payton never scored 5 touchdowns in a football game. And coach said, what got you your fifth string running back? He said, Coach, when my dad was alive, he was legally blind. So I figured that since he died and went to heaven, he could see me. I want them to be proud of me. One of the things that sons want from their fathers is for their fathers to be proud of them. And sometimes the father, when he's available and responsible and there, he lets the son know, I'm proud of you through an affirmation. Sons often need a blessing from their fathers. In fact, I get together with these old dudes that have worked in the addictions profession like me. We go to baseball games together. We go to one minor league game and one major league game every year together. And at one game during the seventh inning stretch, we talked about the blessing, something we always needed from our fathers. One of those tearful moments for some of us. One of my friends who's a social worker, his father was handy and he knew how to fix everything. But my friend never knew how to fix anything with his hands. But he became one of the world's greatest social workers. And at that baseball game, he said what he always needed from his father when he was a boy growing up was for his father to say, you're a good man too. You see, my father was an all-city basketball player at Crane High School. My godfather was an all-American basketball player. My cousins were legendary basketball players at the University of Iowa. One of my cousins was the first African American to integrate the University of Iowa as a basketball player. It was real clear that to be a man in the Sanders family, you couldn't pick up a volleyball. You had to play basketball. And all my life, the blessing that I wanted something from what I wanted from my father was for him to say that I was a good basketball player. And it wasn't until I was 26 years old that he said I was a good basketball player. My career was over by then. I was a social worker by then. Out of curiosity, yes or no, the men who are with us today, do you relate to that? Growing up as a boy, that there was something that you needed from your father. I call it a blessing. Yes or no? Am I the only one that needed something from his father? We had a couple, yes. And some of us got that blessing. And some men never received that blessing, so they look for it. Protection and security. Let's pause on that. In communities where you have high percentages of fathers absent from homes, you can expect to see young men carrying guns in order to experience a feeling of protection and security and confidence. You know how the father tosses his son up in the air and he catches him and it increases his confidence in himself and his confidence in his father. What are some ways that fathers are able to increase their son's confidence? Let us chat. You know, in the neighborhood where I grew up as a kid, when fathers were not there to help increase their son's confidence, gang leaders would try to increase their confidence. Yeah, by being present in activities with them, by being dependable. How about that? In other words, Mary, by being dependable, making sure the boy has secure attachments, which increases confidence in the world. Through verbalizations, I believe in your son. He becomes a model of heavy relationships. Through the relationship the son establishes with the father, by what he witnesses in terms of the father's relationship with his mother, the father can provide attention, increased probability of academic success. Did you know that you know that you know? That research says that when fathers are actively involved in the school, he shows up at PTA meetings, collects the report card, and talks to the teacher, that his involvement increases the academic success of sons and daughters. When fathers are present and responsible and available and involved, it increases financial insecurity. Just know that lots of sons, when there's absence, He sometimes feel like his responsibility to fill the financial void. If I can just give you an example. I have a young man I work with that was deserted by his father when he was 7 years old. When he was 11 years old, his mother called a felony case and his mother struggled to get a job. So at age 11, my client started serving. Some of you are thinking, what restaurant? No, he started serving crack cocaine in order to pay for the family's finances because his dad was gone. His mother struggled to get a job. But my friends, he had a moral dilemma. Two of the women that he sold crack to were pregnant. And one of the women that he sold crack to was his best friend's grandmother. So how did he deal with that moral dilemma? He smoked the crack cocaine himself. So if you forget everything that I talk about today, know that this is important. The men's literature suggests that one of the primary purposes of fathers in a boy's life is to introduce his son to a tribe of men who model positive male bonding. My mother left my father when I was 8 years old. And I'm going to whisper this. Their separation and divorce was the best thing that ever happened for me. Because before they separated and divorced, I never saw my father because he and my mother didn't get along. But when they separated and divorced, I spent every weekend with my father until I was 13 years old. We worked together every weekend. It was predictable. We played basketball together with he and his friends. If anybody ever asked me why I never joined the street gang, it's because my father introduced me to a tribe of men when I was a boy. And I learned healthy male bonding at a really young age. 7 ways father leave their children. Death, divorce, desertion are the top three. Now, of those three, death, the father dies, or he deserts his son, or they get divorced. Which of these three methods of leaving sons do you think has the greatest impact on the children? That's sons and daughters. Is it when the father dies? Is it desertion or divorce? Which of the three has the greatest impact negatively? You hit it, Mary. All three, you're correct. But desertion, it turns out,
Hmm.
is a bit more devastating if I can tell you why. The father can die and the son may not blame himself. Divorce is devastating. But when there's desertion, right, it's like you're not even important enough for me to even recognize that you exist. I'm out of here. Has a destructive impact on sons and daughters. Another way that fathers leave their sons, their daughters, is by being emotionally unavailable. You know how he can be there, but not really be there. You see, I'm of the age where fathers worked outside of the house often, and mothers stayed in the house. And when fathers would come home, they'd want to be left alone. Another way that fathers leave their children is through numbness, like my grandfather. My grandfather was the kind of alcoholic. You would need a DSM-5 to diagnose him as alcoholic. You could smell alcohol coming out of his pores. He was numb all the time. And Dr. Brene Brown said, we cannot selectively numb. Alcohol and drugs, they numb you. It might even numb the love that you have for your children. Through deportation, let us pause on that for a moment. My friends, the Latino Hispanic teenagers that I work with who started joining gangs and who started using drugs heavily were more likely to join a gang and start using heavily when their father was deported or when their mother was deported. And some people believe, and rightfully so, that one of the most devastating impact of like the war on drugs, crack cocaine in the 80s and 90s, were all of these children that were separated from their fathers who were incarcerated connected to crack cocaine. The impact of fatherlessness on sons. difficulty regulating emotions. There's a rapper named Drake who had a song, and Drake was kind of nasal, so I'll rhyme the lyric. Drake said, I go 0 to 100 real quick. I go from calm to explosive like this, from 0 to 100 real quick. But I listened to the whole song. And what he said in the song is, I can never rely on my father, so I rely on myself. I go 0 to 100 real quick, from calm to explosive quickly. Unresolved grief, ambiguous loss. My friends, there are two types of ambiguous loss. The first type of ambiguous loss is physical presence, but psychological absence. The father's alive and in the son's life. Physically, he can see him, but there's no relationship. There he is, but there's no relationship. That can happen if the father has an active addiction and no relationship with his son. Or maybe the father has dementia or Alzheimer's. You know, a strong period of grief for sons is when he always wanted to have a better relationship with his father his whole life. And now the son is at mid age and the father has dementia or Alzheimer's. And now the son is grieving because he knows that even though his dad is alive, they'll never have a relationship that he always yearned for. Another type of ambiguous loss is physical absence, but psychological presence. The father is serving a life sentence for a small possession of a small amount of cocaine. Physical absence, but psychologically in his heart. Or deportation. Physical absence, but psychological presence. And guess what? A lot of people don't even know the son is grieving because the father's alive. He's not dead. Another impact is unhealthy relationship patterns. A teenage girl is pregnant. She's pregnant by Joe. Joe is hoping for a son or a daughter. Would you put in chat, do you think that Joe wants a son or a daughter? Yep. Deborah, I think he wants a son. What does he want to name him? Joe Jr. He sneaks to Lamaze classes. He sees the ultrasound. Joe sees that he's having a son. He's so happy he names him Joe Jr. And then Joe Jr. cries. Joe takes Jr. in his arms, and Jr. cries even louder. Joe hands the Jr. to the mother. Yeah, I'm going to get some milk. Jr. doesn't even need milk. There's the mother. Joe was gone for the next 30 years. What happened? When he heard Jr. cry, it triggered something in him. And what it triggered were those memories when his father left him. Now he's just deserted Junior, the way his father deserted him. This can happen for some people, some families across generations. Early onset of substance use to numb the emotional pain of the absence of the father, to numb the pain of grief, the summer rage. I used to work with boys between the ages of 5 to 10 years old that were deserted by their father. Many of them will be filled with rage, displaced anger, help with moral injury, like the young man who I talked about, who was selling crack cocaine, and it gave him a moral dilemma because he was selling crack to pregnant women and his best friend's girlfriend, and he got high in order to cope. Or medicine for abandonment. Every young man who I work with that smokes marijuana every day suffers from childhood abandonment, and they're numbing the pain of that through alcohol and other drugs. The impact of fathers, male depression. Here's your question. Is depression diagnosed more frequently in girls or boys? The answer is that depression is diagnosed 3 times more frequently in girls.
Mhm.
And is depression diagnosed more in men or women? And the answer is depression is diagnosed more frequently in women than men times three. But there's a book called I Don't Want to Talk About It by Terrence Real, and he talks about male depression. And he makes some really bold statements in the book. And here's the first statement. He says that depression amongst adolescent males is synonymous with drug use. That adolescent males who use drugs heavily are probably depressed. But then the second bold statement is that the reason that most clinicians don't realize how depressed many young men are is because amongst young men who are depressed, their depression often wears masks and disguises. The first mask of male depression is anger. You ever seen a teenage male who looks angry all the time? Terence Real says if you see a teenage male who looks angry all the time, he's probably depressed. The second mask of male depression is rage. Rage is what happens when the boy has been robbed of a feeling vocabulary. His anger builds up and it turns into rage. And how do we rob our sons of a feeling vocabulary? You ever heard the expression, put that boy down, you'll spoil him. You're hugging him too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a study that said by age 12, the most extensive touch the boys receive is when the boy goes to the barber shop and the barber's cutting the boy's hair and the barber's shoulder touches the boy's shoulder. Big boys don't cry. You've heard that expression.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think about my friend Eddie. Eddie was an amazing athlete. When Eddie was 13 years old, his father died. And at the funeral, Eddie was crying. And the men said, Eddie, big boys don't cry. But Eddie noted that the men was drinking. The men weren't crying, but they were drinking. So Eddie stopped crying, he started drinking. And at age 39, Eddie died of cirrhosis of the liver. The message he received is big boys don't cry, they drink. Man up,
Mm-hmm.
don't be a wimp. So we learned that in order to be a man, we have to keep it all inside. So we have these experiences that lead to anger, like our father deserting us. We have to keep it inside. I used to work with these boys, as I mentioned, between the ages of 5 to 10 years old, who didn't have contact with their father. Mr. Sanders, can you find them? Please find my father. Please find him, please. Age 11, if you found my dad, please find him. Age 12, I think about him all the time. Age 13, I never think about him. Age 14, I wished he were dead.
Yeah.
You see what happened? That idealistic yearning turned into rage, and now the world has to pay. So he strikes out in violence. He gets arrested. He winds up in juvenile detention. They give him a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder, but he's really depressed. And the symptoms are masked through anger and rage and violence, which can lead to heavy substance use. Now he's getting high every day to numb the pain of the anger and rage. The fifth mask of male depression is destructive peer group affiliation. He needs an outlet for the anger and rage. So he joins a street gang, or he joins a hate group where he can act out in violence. And then, according to Terrence Real, sometimes what happens is a teenage male who looked angry all the time becomes a young adult male at 21. And at 21, the anger is not strong enough to mask his depression. So at age 21, he looks classically depressed. He no longer looks angry, he looks classically depressed. He wants to die. But he knows if he dies by suicide, the family can't get that small life insurance policy that he has. So he sets himself up to be killed. Someone shoots and kills him. The coroner does an autopsy. They rule the cause of death as homicide, but he really set himself up to kill. We call that a suicide. That's masked as a homicide. By the way, yes or no in chat. Has anything I said make sense so far? Does this make sense? Or does it seem like I'm just talking just to talk? All right. You say it makes sense so far. All right. All right. Another thing that can happen when fathers are deserted by their father, when boys are deserted by their father, they can skip a generation like they never have a childhood. Like they're the man of the house now. My dad is gone. You know, I tell single mothers when the father leaves the family, don't make the boy the man of the house. Let him stay a boy. Nancy,
Hmm.
you can only be a boy for about 13 years, a teenager for only 6. You got to be a man for the rest of your life. You know, I tell single parents, if he's 12 years old, he's the man of the house. It means he's married to you. Now, you all don't know my mother, but you knew my mother. You'd understand the statement I'm about to make. If I was 12 years old married to my mother, I'd smoke weed every day. I mean, that's a whole lot of work. You all don't know my mother. Benny Lee taught me this model: stages of development, the consumer years, birth to age 18. There are 3 tasks between birth to age 18: to consume the food that your parents put on the table, to consume knowledge by going to school. And that phase ends with a high school diploma. What happens when you drop out of school? If you live in a big city like Chicago and you drop out of high school, you've increased the chances that you'll wind up in Cook County Jail. If you live in a small town, rural America, maybe you live in Murfreesboro, if you live in Carbondale, research says if you live in a small town in rural America and you drop out of school, you've decreased your life expectancy by 15 years. I want you all to feel that. There's a relationship between father absence and dropping out of school. The apprenticeship years, ages 19 to 29. And what happens in those years after you get a high school diploma or GED? You become an apprentice. You study what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Think about it. From age 19 to 29, you can do anything from getting a certificate to be a cook in a kitchen to an MD. And then 30 to 70, the productive years, where you go to work and you focus on what you studied during the apprenticeship years. But I don't know about you. But though some of you do probation work, some of you work in recovery work. I've worked with lots of clients who fell behind, who never got that GED, who never got that high school diploma. And at age 30, they're trying to complete high school. The impact of fatherlessness completed, early crime, increased rates of poverty. Christmas is coming. So I start, Nancy, humming Christmas tunes this time of year. My favorite Christmas singer is a singer by the name of Nat King Cole. And I was talking to a neighbor about how much I love Nat King Cole's Christmas album. And he whispered, the best song that Nat King Cole ever sung about Christmas didn't make the album because it's a profound song, but it's so sad. And Nancy, I just listened to the song the other day. It's called The Little Boy That Santa Claus Forgot. The Little Boy That Santa Claus Forgot. And I'll give you 2 lyrics. He's a little boy that Santa Claus forgot. And goodness knows he didn't want a lot. Then another lyric goes, in the streets he envied those lucky boys, then wanders home to last year's broken toys. I'm so sorry for that little laddie. He hasn't got a daddy. The little boy that Santa forgot. We have the greatest Christmas in the world. Early on, we had a 2 family income. And then in separation, Christmas is stopped. I relate to the story of the little boy that Santa forgot. Early sexual activity. It turns out that sons are more likely to engage in early sexual activity when the father's not in the home. Increased rates of poverty. And what does that cause? Research says that when there's an absent father, it costs our economy $1 billion, $100 billion annually. Increased needs for food stamps, nutrition assistance, housing assistance, child support enforcement, juvenile justice involvement. In the absence of a role model that demonstrates wholeness. There's a book I bring to your attention, and the book is called The King, the Warrior, Lover, Magician by Dr. Robert Moore, an archaeologist, anthropologist, that is. And Robert Moore went around the world as an anthropologist, asking people to tell him stories about men. And what he learned all over the world is people tell stories about four types of men all over the world. There's the king, the one with the power and authority, who doesn't abuse his power as authority. He blesses others. He uses this power to make the community, the county, the tribe better. He sacrifices his needs for the good of the group. So my son, his favorite food, even today, he's 22 years old now. His favorite food has always been chicken nuggets. My wife would bake it for him when he was a kid. So I was testing to see if he's a king. So when he was 5 years old, I said to ask my son, if you had only two chicken nuggets and I was hungry and you were hungry and your mother was hungry, who would eat those chicken nuggets? And age 5, he said, Daddy, I would eat them both and you and mommy would watch. I asked him at age 7, and son, if you were hungry and I was hungry and your mother were hungry, and you had two chicken nuggets, who would eat? He said, Daddy, I think, well, maybe I would eat one and mommy would eat one and you would watch. I asked him at age 10. I said, son, if there were two chicken nuggets and you were hungry and I was hungry and your mother were hungry, who would eat? He said, Daddy, I would give you and mom one, and then I would watch. Remind me to tell you what he said when he was 14. You'll like his answer. The king. Then Robert Moore said all over the world, people would tell stories about the warrior. And the warrior is the brave one, the soldier, the one that protects the village, right? Visualize back in the day, a father waking up his son in a hut, sleeping next to his mother, taking him out to the wilderness, giving him a spear, a bow and arrow, and he learns how to be a warrior. Historically, Robert Moore said, next to the king, the warrior was always the prized husband because he brought home the bacon. And all over the world, people told stories about the lover. And the lover should never be confused with the sexual man. This is the man that can cry, that can hold a hand, that can give a hug. The emotional man who can be vulnerable. He's the relationship builder, the lover. Notice I don't have any pictures of the lover. They exist. And then the magician, the creative problem solver, the great negotiator. So there's a famine in the land, and the warrior can't bring home any food. What does the magician do? He negotiates with a rival tribe and brings home the food. Robert Moore said that all four of these archetypes are present within each man, and he needs to know when to lead with which. So let me quiz you. Let's go backwards. There's a magician, the great negotiator, the man who can pull a rabbit out of the hat. There's a lover who can be emotional, vulnerable. He can cry, build relationships. He can give a hug. And there's the warrior, the protector, the brave one, the courageous one, the one who brings home the bacon. And then the king, who sacrifices what he needs for the good of the group. So let me give you a quiz. There's a young man who's 19 years old. He's walking down the street. He's holding his girlfriend's hand. Let us check. He's holding her hand. Which of these four archetypes are dominating at that moment? The king, the warrior, the lover, the magician. You got it, Luana, the lover. He doesn't care what his friend thinks. He likes her. He's holding her hand. When was the last time you seen a teenage male holding his girlfriend's hand? This young man is doing that. Okay. Now, while he's holding his girlfriend's hand, a lion, a tiger, and bear escape from the county zoo, and they're charging towards them. Which archetype takes over? The lover, the warrior, the magician, or the king? Jessica the warrior, right? He protects them. One young man told me, the magician, I run. What do you do? I take her with me. We run together. All right, very good, the warrior. Okay. He makes it to her house, and her little boy brother is crying because he just got cut from the basketball team. Which archetype takes over? The king, the warrior, the lover, the magician. Which one takes over? Boy, you all getting this, boy. You all getting this. Yeah, Melanie. Mary says it. The lover, not the sexual man, but he gets down on one knee. He said, man, I love you. I know you love basketball. I know you love basketball. Because every time I show up, you out with your sister, you out there practicing. Man, you put in a lot of work. So it's okay to cry, man. You probably heard big boys don't cry. It's okay to cry. You might even tell him, Nancy, I got a really good friend named Mark Sanders who got cut from his high school team in sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth grade. And he cried because he always wanted his father to tell him he was a good basketball player. It's okay to cry. They even called him a crybaby because he cried, but he was hurt. He wanted to make his daddy proud. And you know what might happen then at that point? The magician might kick in. Because what he might tell him, but my friend Mark Sanders kept practicing. And he played on this high school team in 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th. And he played 4 years of college basketball. Well, he might tell him the story of Scottie Pippen. Scottie Pippen was a magician. Scottie Pippen, who teamed with Michael Jordan, didn't make his college basketball team as a freshman. He was 5'9". So Scottie, as a magician, said, let me be the manager of the team. And somebody got sick. And they put Scottie on the team. And between his freshman year in college and his sophomore year, Scottie Pippen grew from 5'9" to 6'7". I had a client who was on probation, and he was walking to meet with me, and somebody from a second floor window called him the N-word. I said, what did you do? He said, I thought about going up there and folding them like a napkin. I said, what would you call that? He said, breaking and entering, assault and battery, and violation of probation. So I taught him this model because a lot of young men only have permission to be a tough guy. So I taught him the model. And I told him that Dr. King was a king because he was willing to die for us. Mandela's a king. Gandhi a king. Churchill a king. They were willing to die. I said, when can a king fight? And he said, in self-defense. And I said, in self-defense. All right, now here's the deal. All four of these archetypes are present within one man. Each has a shadow, a less mature version of the real archetype. So the shadow of the king is the corrupt preacher, the corrupt leader. You know, like Bernie Madoff, who sold everybody's money, stole Granny's pension. That's a corrupt king, a shadow king. The shadow warrior is the bully, the gang member, the rageaholic. See, the warrior fights to protect. The bully picks on people. The shadow lover is the womanizer, the serial affair guy, the guy who cheats all the time. And the shadow magician is the con artist, the manipulator. So here's the deal. As we mentioned, all four of these archetypes are present within each male, and he needs to know when to lead with which. And get this, more important, he needs role models. What he needs to develop wholeness are men and women that model wholeness. For all of us, men and women, when we're whole, we're all kings. How many women, mothers, refuse to eat so that her kids can eat? She's a king. And I know mothers that protect their children. She's a warrior. And mothers are lovers. And those of you who grew up in poverty, remember that when your family didn't have food, Your mother prepared a feast with no money. They need access to role models to develop wholeness. So, intervention time. You can put your response in chat. What strategies do you recommend to help sons impacted by fatherlessness? And then the second question is, how would you strengthen the father-son relationships? So let's start with intervention strategies. What do these sons need who are deserted by their fathers or who don't have a relationship with their fathers? What would you recommend? So Summer says mentors, even if it's not even the father, you mentioned the importance of mentors, a tribe of men. You know, if I could leave every community with one thing, it'd be that each community needs to have a Boy Scouts of America. I looked at studies of young men who were involved in the Boy Scouts for at least 5 years. They have a 99% high school graduation rate. Half of them have graduated from college. The great majority of them are in middle class. They never go to jail. And Felix is talking about the importance of support groups. I'm going to add to you all's list. Counseling, early counseling, when he's been deserted by his father, that focuses on grief and the importance of healthy attachments and trauma. When my mother left my father, it was traumatic. That was the most traumatic thing that happened in my young life. Young men need a membership. It's an incredible story about this boy who played Little League Baseball on a team known as the Cougars. His name was Mike, and Mike came down with cancer requiring him to have chemotherapy, radiation treatment. He lost his hair. And he was embarrassed to go to the next Cougars baseball game because at the beginning of each game, the team would line up along the third baseline, take off their hats and place them over their heart, and sing the national anthem. And he was afraid that everyone would laugh at him when they saw that he had no hair. And his father talked him into going to the next Cougars baseball game. And sure enough, the team lined up along the third baseline. And right before Mike took off his hat, all 25 of his Cougar baseball teammates took off their hats first. And he saw they'd all lost their hair. They shaved their heads. And they looked at him and they said, once a Cougar, always a Cougar. That when he feels deserted, he needs a membership. My father did three things when he and my mother separated. He gave me a dog. He gave me a watch. And he gave me a membership to the YMCA. I was 8 years old. My daddy gave me a dog. Maybe he knew I needed something to love and a watch. I don't know why he gave me that watch, but I'm never late for anything. Almost 5 decades later. And he gave me a membership to the YMCA. Incredible story out of Big Brothers, Big Sisters. This corporate executive that lived in Lincoln Park, you know, the high rent district in Chicago, who volunteered to be a big brother through Big Brothers, Big Sisters to an African American male that lived on the west side of Chicago. So the corporate executive looked in his closet because he was about to meet with the young boy for the first time. He knew he didn't want to wear a suit to his first mentorship meeting. So put on a red sweater and a white t-shirt, a red sweater, white t-shirt, drove to the west side to meet with his African American youth. He didn't know how to have a conversation with the youth. He had never taken a counseling class, learned how to nod his head, saying, I see, tell me more. He went back to Big Brothers. I quit. I couldn't talk to the kid. And they convinced him to go back one more time. And he showed up the following week. And the young boy answered the door. And the boy was wearing a red sweater and a white t-shirt. The research out of Big Brothers Big Sisters said that even when you don't feel like you're making a connection, your presence can matter. Research out of Big Brothers Big Sisters says that when a young person has contact with a mentor, there's less violence compared to control groups. They use fewer drugs, better grades, and they get along better with their parents. Mentorship and a membership helps. By the way, in Chicago, there's a group called the Jesse White Tumblers. You all might know Jesse White. He was our Secretary of State forever. He has a tumbling group that are tumbled all over the world. Less than 1% of these young men spend time in the criminal justice system, less than 1%. There's a group in Chicago that's called the South Shore Drill Team. They perform in parades all over the world. Only a small percentage of them wind up in the criminal justice system. Early substance use disorders prevention. You know, the earlier a young person at risk for an addiction gets help for their addiction, the younger they resolve it. The best age to get help for a substance use disorder, if it appears at age 13, is age 13. Look at Drew Barrymore. You know why she's in long-term recovery? She started getting help at age 13. The earlier, the better. Support for single parents. We don't condemn single mothers. We provide support. And then even where there's distance between the parents, if we can just bring them together as parents, then that can help their children. Early academic support of the child. You know, when my father was no longer living with us, my uncle started showing up. And they filled a really big void until I could establish that bond with my father. The involvement of uncles and grandfathers. Journaling. You know how we know that journaling helps? You know how we know? I'm pausing for dramatic effect. All rap music is journaling. Look at how the rappers transform their lives. You know, when Tupac Shakur died, the rapper Eminem said, I'm the white Tupac Shakur. And what did they have in common? Drug addicted mothers, absent fathers who they hated. The difference is that Tupac, filled with rage, died before the miracle occurred. Eminem kept rhyming, kept rhyming, kept rhyming. And today he celebrates 16 years of recovery. And then there's the rapper Jay-Z, whose father left the family when he was a little boy. And he had all that hate in his heart. In fact, in one of his songs he sung, he said, my teachers couldn't reach me, and my mother couldn't beat me hard enough to erase the pain of my pops not seeing me. So with this stain in my membrane, I got on my pimp game. F the world, my defenses came. And he explained that when his father left, he became a drug dealer and a hustler and a thug. But he kept rhyming. And on his most recent album, he wrote, I can no longer hate my father because now I realize we're the opposite sides of the same coin. My father used drugs. I sold drugs. What's the difference? And oh, he said, I now understand my father. You see, my father's father was a preacher. JG's grandfather was a preacher who would preach sermons on Sunday and then molest his daughter on Monday. My dad grew up in that environment. Of course, he used drugs to numb himself. I'm telling these stories because I want to break the pattern in my family. Journaling. You'd be shocked how many rappers suffer from father hunger, father wounds, and they've rhymed their way out of it. You know who was injured by their father? Was President Barack Obama. He was filled with rage because his father deserted the family. But it was in writing that book, Letters to My Father, that he worked through his anger and rage and became the president of the United States. Bill Clinton, his father died when he was young, and his stepfather would abuse him. And he wrote letters to his biological father and said, this man is abusing me, but I'm going to make you proud one day. And he became president of the United States. Rites of passage. What is a rite of passage? Let us chat. What's a rite of passage? By definition, a rite of passage is a culturally prescribed ritual to transition a boy into a man or girl into a woman. Historically, in villages, a girl would experience her first menstrual cycle, and her mother and women in the village would take her into a hut. And they would explain to her that her body was changing, and they would celebrate her first menstrual cycle, and then they would teach her what it takes to become a woman in that village. That's a rite of passage. Historically, when a boy was 13 years old, his father and men in the village would take him into the wilderness and teach him bravery how to hunt and what it means to become a man. Let us check. Where you live and where you work. How does a boy today know when he's a man? Where you live and where you work. How does a boy know when he's a man? Sometimes people are a little nervous to give the first answer. What's the second answer? So society tells them. So that means if they tell me I'm a man at 11, does it mean I'm a man when he becomes responsible? Not bad, Mary, not bad at all when he becomes responsible. You know, some men define manhood by being responsible by having a job. What happens when the factory closes? Is he still a man? You know, the most consistent gun violence is not urban gun violence. The most consistent gun violence in America is when men in small towns, their jobs go away and they pick up their gun. So we have to define it beyond being a man. But let me ask you, Adam, are you really a man at age 18, even though you can buy a lottery ticket at age 18? The answer is these rituals have disappeared. So let me tell you all the story and then we'll segue. About 20 years ago, me and 7 African American social workers took a journey to Ghana, West Africa. We were on a plane for 18 hours. You've been on a plane for 18 hours. It was horrible. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep. My sinuses were acting up on the plane. I had a headache when you couldn't believe. And on top of all that, when the plane landed, my luggage was lost. I was irritated. Didn't know what to expect. Our first stop was to a village. And there were a group of elders, African elders, between the ages of 70 to 90 years old. They were sitting in a circle. And they asked the 7 of us to join them in the circle. And one of my friends asked the elders the question, so how do you feel about us as African Americans? When he asked that question, it was so quiet you can almost hear a pin drop. I later asked, why did you ask that question? Man, I waited my whole life to ask that one question. How do you feel about us as African Americans? We were not prepared for their response. They said, we love you. We think about you more than you know. And we pray for you. And we cry like babies. And while we were there, we learned about rites of passages. And what we were taught is that young men will always get initiated. If they're not positive males, like a father to take them through the initiation, they'll go through gang initiation or hate good group initiation or hazing. Boys will always be initiated as a rite of passage. So we made it back to Chicago and we organized rites of passage groups for young men on probation and parole. But we first went through these rites of passages ourselves. By the way, have you ever heard of a band becoming a man? It's a rites of passage curriculum that's being used in our public schools, founded by Tony DiVittorio. He credits me, his former professor, was being part of the influence in developing this rites of passage curriculum. I wouldn't have known to help him to think about that curriculum had we not traveled to Ghana, West Africa, to learn about rites of passage. So the first thing we have them do, these young men on probation parole, is we have them come up with a group name, a group logo, and a group mission statement. Because every gang has a name, a logo, and a mission statement. We're promoting group bonding. Then we have them research the history of their own name. Then we have them do a family tree where they interview elders in their family to learn more about the family before they were born. We asked them to secure a library card, a state ID, a voter registration card, to read two books, one about their culture, to do a group project together, something to uplift and beautify the community, like community cleanup or removing graffiti off the wall, helping the elders with shopping. And then we take them on these weekend retreats away from the city where they do personal growth work. And what do you think that personal growth work mostly focuses on? We use gestalt therapy, empty chair work, journaling. What do you think these groups focus on? The most common theme on these weekend retreats are issues connected to the father-son relationship. You all know blues guitarist Buddy Guy, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a blues guitarist, one of the greatest guitarists in the history of guitar players. The story had it that when Buddy Guy was a young guitarist, he got a woman pregnant on the road, and he felt like she trapped him. So he stayed away from her for 20 something years. Then he became curious. Did he have a son or a daughter? So he looked her up. Found out he had a son who also played the guitar. So when I read the story, I thought about a friend I went to high school with named Joe. And Joe was sitting in the cafeteria and pretending he was playing the piano. I said, Joe, you have incredible skills with your hands. You ought to take piano lessons. Joe never knew his father, and he called me one day when we were 40 years old. He said, I met my father for the first time. Joe's father was a jazz pianist that got his mother pregnant on the road. It was in his hands. So Buddy Guy said to his son, I want to teach you to play like me. I'm in the Hall of Fame. You need to play like me. I don't want to play like you. You deserted me. Where were you? I want to play like my idol, Prince. Buddy Guy's son played well enough to meet Prince. And Prince told him, in order to play like me, you have to study my mentor, a man named Jimi Hendrix. Then you got to study his mentor, a man by the name of Buddy Guy. I've met many sons that were filled with so much rage from their father that they run from him. They run from him by smoking weed, by using heroin, by getting women pregnant and running, by driving fast cars, through crime. But everywhere you go, there is. You know what a chief told me in Ghana? If you hate your father and you look like that man, and every time you look in the mirror, you see that man, you got some work to do. Yeah, we take him away on weekend retreats. I'm angry with my father. Here's a punching bag. I'm angry with my father. Here's a pen and paper. Write about it. Sometimes that relationship has boys stuck for life. Activities which increase confidence, like boxing, martial arts, distance running. I agree with Will Smith, the Fresh Prince. He said if he had his way, every young man would take up distance running and reading. Distance running teaches you grit, how to defeat that voice that tells you to quit. And you could read biographies by young men that were successful who grew up without fathers in their home, sports and affirmations, and helping their son with the search. Some boys have never met their father, so they can ask their mom, who's my dad? Ask the mother's grandparents, who's my father? Can you tell me about him? Tell me some stories about him. Or their older siblings. Me and my big sister, we know things about our father that our younger siblings don't know. Or their aunts and uncles to tell them stories about their father. If they're lucky, they can get their father's hands on their yearbook. You know what one of my friends did on Facebook? He befriended some of his father's high school classmates on Facebook to ask him to tell him some things about his father. He can ask his godparents, tell me some stories about my father, who's my dad. I met some young men who, in the process of trying to learn some things about their father, wound up being a part of the father's family. They wound up with a bigger family. They can look through photo albums. After all, you're carrying half of this man's DNA. Some people even say you're just like him and you've never met him. We can coach fathers on how to be dads, meeting with them one on one, helping him to examine the impact of how the fathering he received, is impacting his fathering today, letting him know how important he is, that he doesn't have to be a perfect father, and that the benefits and stuff about being involved in the kids' schooling, right? Taking them to lunch or breakfast, respecting the son's mother, and being the on-call parent and listening to his son. I did a lot of marital therapy, and wives, their primary complaint, I get all dressed up and I go to dinner with my husband and he's not looking at me, he's looking at everyone else. But when you look at how males bond with each other, it's not always face to face. It's side by side. Fathers and son going to a football game, they're sitting side by side. I was on the starting five when I finally made a basketball team as a sophomore. You line up next to your teammates side by side, male bonding. Even if son is filled with the rage towards the father, we stress the importance of keeping lines of communication open, taking the son to school. For a long time when my son was young, he didn't want me to take him to school because he was angry with me, because my job was so inconsistent, because I was on the road doing trainings. He didn't know when I'd be at home. So we had to work on that. And then, of course, we have our fair share of fathers who are incarcerated. The good news, I don't know if you're aware of this curriculum, but they have a curriculum inside of the prisons where the father can begin to build relationships with their sons and daughters even while they're incarcerated. And then, of course, there are reentry circles where the formerly incarcerated can meet in groups to talk about what it's like trying to parent again when you haven't seen your kids in a decade, and receive support from others who are also had periods when they were incarcerated and lost contact and lost rapport with their children. Let me ask you, what I've learned over the years, it's not so much what I teach, but it's more about the action you take. So let's take a moment and check. What's the one action you're going to take when this webinar is over as a result of the time we spent together today? What's your action, no matter how big or how small? What will you do? Will you let this information shiver up on a shelf? Just place it on the shelf while it rots like a raisin in the sun, or a raisin in the sun? What will you do? So Barbara's going to share with others. Barb, they say if you really want to learn something, teach it to two other people. So by all means, Barb, share our information with others. How about others? What's the action you're going to take when this webinar is over? Adam is going to work to build up a mentorship program. Adam, one of my first jobs was through Prevention First. It's probably where I met Nancy, was to travel through every county in Illinois trying to help them develop mentorship programs. I was at one county. They said, we don't have any available mentors. There were three colleges in that town. We told them that college students make excellent mentors of kids. If you want kids to go to college, let them have a mentor on the college campus. So Catherine's going to reiterate the importance of male involvement. I'm telling you, my uncles made all the difference in the world when my father wasn't around. Yeah, Mary, sometimes young people just need to be heard. And Keith is going to be more available to adolescent clients. Yes, Guy mentioned like incorporating into our own parenting. I want to be as good of a parent as my father was. My father eventually died smoking crack cocaine. He was an incredible father because he gave us his time and his ear. Renault, share with my clients. Thank you, Renault. Thank you for being a soldier on the battlefield with us all these years. I want to take a moment to just express gratitude to you, Nancy, for all the years that you've done this work, all the difference you've made over the years, and the fact that you are doing what Bill White suggested that we all do as we look to the day when we actually stop doing this work, is to make sure that we have our eye on the next generation to do this work. I want you to know that I know that that big project that you just completed, um, providing resources for children whose parents have died of an overdose, that great work that you've done and those seminars you put together around that is going to outlive all of us. So thank you for that groundbreaking work that you have just done. You know, you all mentioned in chat mentorship a number of times. So I want to share with you, just as I close, a story about one of my mentors, my barber. And my barber was my barber from the time I was 14 years old. Throughout his life, he was my barber. He cut my hair when I graduated from high school and undergraduate and graduate. He cut my hair before I got married. He cut my hair before I went to my son's funeral. He cut both of my sons' hair. He gave them their first haircut. Great sense of humor my barber had. He used to ask me, why do barbers have such low rates of divorce? I don't know why. Because they're never at home. They're always cutting hair. He was in recovery. And his pathway of recovery is he became a barber. See, barbers are important because they talk in your ear. So he told me so much. He told me before he became a barber, he was addicted to heroin. His pathway of recovery is becoming a barber. He said he spent 6 months in jail because he couldn't make $100 bail. He said, you should always have $100. And Nancy, I spent the rest of my life making sure I always had $100. My barber told me when I was 14 years old that you should respect every woman, even the ones who sell their bodies on the street, because every woman is somebody's daughter or mother or sister. Respect. So there's a story my barber told me for like 50 years, which I'll share with you in closing. And he shared this story with me more frequently than any other story about a minister in a small town. And 7 days a week at exactly 6 p.m., the minister would knock on the door of one of the church members. Why 6 p.m.? My barber said, because it was dinner time. They'd invite the minister to the dinner table. And because everyone in the congregation believed that the minister was closer to God than they were, whatever they were eating, they would always give the minister the largest portion. A family of five, if they were eating a meatloaf, they would cut half of the meatloaf and give it to the pastor, and the five of them would eat the other half. If they were eating chicken, they would always give the minister the largest portions, the breast and the thigh. I wondered, why did he tell me that story for 5 decades? And one day I figured it out. That story is about you, the work that you do in prevention, and as a school social worker, and as a recovery support specialist, and as a therapist, and as a case manager. I see your work as a ministry. a holy ministry. Every day you wake up, somebody's life can be improved. So I like to believe if you made a home visit, a family might offer you the breast and the thigh of the chicken. But I also know your heart. You're a giver. You'd pass on that. So, you enjoy the chicken. I just want to be here just to offer support. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for all that you do. Know that I agree with Muhammad Ali. On Ali's headstone is a quote from Ali that said that service to others is the rent that you pay for your room here on earth. Service to others is the rent that you pay for your room here on earth. Know that I know because you've committed your life to helping others. Renault Tatum, and all the rest of you, your rent has been paid in full. Thank you so much, and thank you, Nancy, for inviting me to present this webinar. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. I told you all that you were going to have a terrific experience. I encourage you to fill out the evaluations, and I will double Mark's thanks for what you do every day that I get up and I get to interact with these groups that are so diverse and so committed. I'm just grateful that I'm part of it. So, till next time, mm,
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Happy holidays, everyone.
that's right. Bye bye.